Hi, welcome everybody. It's Nick from Global Distribution. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about workflow magic with Strongbox Data Solutions. This is the third in our series of our Strongbox webinars focusing around the StrongLink product. So let me just introduce Floyd from Strongbox Data Solutions. Hello, Floyd. Thank you very much for joining us again for the third time. Do you want to give us a little quick flavor for those people that haven't seen the previous webinars, what StrongLink is, what it does, just in a nutshell, something about the company?
Sure. Strongbox Data Solutions is a company that has been long in the archive space, beginning its origins with a tape-based virtualization product, but we've moved much past that, and it's a software solution that is really meant to address how you manage data across heterogeneous or multi-vendor storage environments.
Brilliant. And you've got sort of customers that range anywhere from sort of a couple hundred terabytes up into the hundreds of petabytes now at the moment, and across sort of which verticals in particular do you focus on?
We focus on where the data is, and that goes really across all verticals, whether it's manufacturing, media and entertainment, life sciences research. Anywhere where there's lots of unstructured data, the problems that we solve really rise up, which is kind of what I'll be talking about today as well.
Perfect. Okay, well, just before you jump in with your presentation and demo of your system, I'm just going to recap for the viewers some of the topics that we covered in the previous webinar. So back on the 2nd of June, we focused on taking back control of your data, and I'm sure, as Floyd will talk about, this is about how StrongLink, once it's installed in your environment, can index all your data, extract the metadata, and then allow you to take action upon that metadata. And it also allows you to have a global view of all your data across multi-vendor data silos. It can be used to present S3 buckets as NFS or CIFS, or even vice versa. So that was the first webinar. The second webinar, which was last week, was on protecting and managing your data. So that was how Strongbox could be leveraged to get data into different archive tiers, maybe cloud, LTFS, etc. Protect you from ransomware, and that's a hot topic, obviously ongoing at the moment. And for this week, we're going to talk about workflow magic, and that large part is about using the metadata that StrongLink has extracted from your separate data silos, and managing to get that metadata to drive automation. Without too much further ado, I'm just going to hand back over to Floyd, and just to remind people that we are going to be taking questions during the presentation. We won't be doing it live, but hopefully underneath your screen you will see a text box, so please feel free to type in questions and we'll address those at the end in a Q&A session. But anyway, that's enough from me, and I'll hand over to Floyd.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you everybody for joining. If I can get to this. So as Nick said, the problem that we're really addressing is how to deal with data that lives across, typically, or needs to live across multiple different storage types. It can start with, just even knowing, what do I have? Where is it? How do users access it? Is it protected? And all of these things also lead up to, where should that data be now? And the question that we often get is, okay, is this a data management problem or is it a storage management problem? And so let me step back for a second and really look at what I call the constants of lifecycle management of data. This may seem obvious, but it kind of begins to answer the question if you dig into it a little bit. We all know that data needs to be created, but it's very rare that the storage that the data lands on when it is created is actually the storage that it should live on, which means that there's data movement based on some criteria, and it varies from use case to use case, which then gets it into a second level, where often there's migration up and down a hierarchy, or the need to manage this data, the need to use this data over its life cycle. And then depending on how active that data is or what the use case is, whether it should remain on the storage classes that make up this center section, or whether they should move to archive or to delete, really becomes a question that needs to be managed. The problem is to know when to move it, where to move it, how to maintain access of it, even whether or not you can delete it, is a non-trivial question. I talk to database or data center administrators who often don't know, particularly in the research space or in higher ed universities, they don't know whether they can delete data or not because they're not entirely sure what it is. And so the problem is that often the tools that you need to manage that data are separate from the tools that you need to manage where it lives on the storage. When you compound this by having multiple types of storage, either multiple vendors or storage types, then you run into even more complexity in the environment. So our proposal is that, you know, if you manage your data by storage platform, your priorities are really on the allocation. So in other words, you're trying to balance which storage it is based on the availability of that storage. But the other side of it is, if you're managing your data by business policy, then you're really more focused on the utilization of that data. You know, is it in the right place? Does it match the business criteria? And especially over the long term, when data is inevitably going to move from one storage to another, making sure that it is sitting on the correct storage for its business purposes, so that you can optimize based on the cost of the media that it's stored on, frequency of access, and other sort of retention policies. This becomes really the most primary focus. The problem is traditional data management may be focused on business policy, whereas storage-based data management may be more just about the platform itself and ensuring that there's a sufficient capacity. The reality is that both data management and storage resource management are two parts of the same solution and addressing the same problem. That is, to combine the data intelligence that you can get from rich metadata, as I've covered in both of the previous sessions, but primarily in the first, where you can aggregate multiple types of metadata, so you have a clear picture of what is going on with the data, how frequently it's used, what project it belongs to, and then the ability to take action on that, particularly at scale. So the problem is that, you know, there is no one size fits all storage, or even a one size fits most is an average, which when the data is undifferentiated, it means that it never quite fits well. You may solve the capacity problem, but you may have difficulty solving the problem of how to apply intelligent security or privacy services to that data, depending on which storage tier or which storage silo it's on. It also, by the data itself being undifferentiated or unclassified, it means that, you know, being able to understand how to recover it in the case of accidental deletion or other sort of disruptive events that may happen. Which platform do you go to recover that data? Especially the larger you get, where you may have multiple types of backup or multiple different types of retention policies, this becomes much more of a burden for IT administrators and decouples it even more from what users actually need to see. And then finally, being able to govern that data or manage it becomes more expensive the more silos you have and the more manual this is. If you're not clear on what that data is, which project it belongs to, it makes it even more difficult to make sure that you've got regulatory or other compliance issues taken care of. And all of these activities, not only the difficulty in managing these, but in the requirement that IT administrators must be hands-on in terms of managing these for the case of their users, it all impacts user access, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So in the first two sessions, and this chart really sort of summarizes the types of problems that people come to StrongLink for. And it kind of also maps with what we've talked about in the first session. For example, data movement, being able to ensure that you can bridge across platforms, handle tech refresh non-disruptively, knowing which data can go into an active archive. Or the second session when we talked about data protection, whether it be for business continuity, DR, or just optimizing across them. And today we're going to talk about workflow automation, where the data classification and metadata management then can drive your data placement and data policies across multiple copies of those files in different stores. The reality is, in any modern IT environment, all of these things are pretty much the same problem and involve understanding what that data is, understanding how it should be kept and on which storage class it should be kept, and then making sure that you can do this in a way that you can demonstrate and minimize the disruption to your users. So it is a combination of the storage side view of the data center and your workflow and the data management side. So storage resource management and data management all in one solution. So as we mentioned before, by aggregating the metadata into the common metadata repository and being able to connect any to any storage, whether it be direct access for high IOPS, typically tier 0 or very high performance storage, or being able to create a global namespace and an abstraction layer that can go across any storage to enable you to move that data from a tier 0, even represent it by reference out through multi-protocols on the front side, and then being able to pick whichever store. Maybe you don't have tape and have no intention of getting tape, but the ability to push it to a cloud provider, or the ability to bring it in and put it into a tier 2 disk, or other storage choices, it starts to address the problem of how come my primary storage, my most expensive storage is filling up, and how do I take advantage of that and move it off stream? So what I'm going to do now is switch into the StrongLink application and show you how the metadata-based queries can help you solve some of these problems. So if you'll remember from the first session, on the right, this is a virtual file system. I'm in California, and this is mounted into a system in our lab in Portland, Oregon. So I've got a NAS share. Actually, I've got multiple shares here from different subsets of the namespace. And this one, to me, it just looks like a file system. I can access the files. I can open the files. I can drag files in and out. I can work on it just like I would on any other NAS solution. On the left-hand side, I've got a virtual view of the global namespace through our browser-based application. So a reminder, I don't have to install a client on the software on the user side in order to see this, any more than I need to install agents or stubs or symlinks to keep track of where that data is across the storage. But let's look at this and how this can be used. So these files, for example, as I've showed, in this case, these happen to live by policy on 3 different stores. If I click on full detail, you'll see that here on the left, there's a primary copy that's sitting on a NetApp, a secondary copy that's sitting on tape, and a third copy that's sitting in S3 in Amazon. Some extracted metadata, and I've pre-populated some custom metadata that I created that shows a project ID and a retention date. So let's go back and look at how I can use that information. and as well as not just the custom metadata, but also the actual information. So in the lower left, you'll see that I've created several queries, and I've done this to give you an example of types of queries that might be useful as a storage administrator, ensuring that you know what you've got and that it's in the right place. For example, this isilon query. This is quite simple. All I want to do is determine which of my data that hasn't been accessed in 30 days or more is sitting on an isilon. You know, I could add more variables to that, but in this case, I just want to see what my activity is on the isilon. When I run that query, I get a set of data. If I reverse that query, and it's going to give me the opposite, which is, which data has not been accessed frequently. And you can see that this is a relatively new file system, and so most of this data is new. Well, I can take action now on that as well. So, by redoing this query, maybe I want to find data that needs to move. Well, the query isn't just for information, although I can run a verify job to, pick which copy might be and whether I want to, run a file verification, or maybe I want to globally add more metadata to this that I could do as in the course of a workflow. But I can also use this same query to run a policy, maybe to copy that or outgest it, or even do a hard delete based on certain criteria. Other examples might be, looking at which data in the entire global namespace is sitting on tape, or add a rule looking for the file size. For example, maybe I want to go to a file size query here. In this case, I've selected the file size from the file system metadata, and I want to look for all files that are less than 10 megabytes. I also only want to search in the archive namespace, and I only want to search for JPEG files. So running that, I'm going to get a set of data that is going to match those criteria, which again, I can now put as part of a policy to run it. I can run a report based on that query so that I can export that, and I know, or I can use that internally to make a decision on what I'm doing. There's many other things that you can do. For example, we often have use cases in customers where they want to look at all of the data in an archive that has met a certain retention date. This is very important when you're dealing with not only just compliance type workflows, but this also could be based on storage policy. We've got a customer, for example, that has to maintain a copy of that data on certain storage types for a given number of years since it was last accessed. So, being able to pop up a file system metadata query and add access time to something based on this, so that maybe anything that hasn't been accessed in a certain number of days, that also includes, a criteria for the retention date, as well as for project ID or namespace, or that could just as easily, instead of being a particular namespace, this could be, a store, show it only on a particular store type, such as LTFS, or on in a cloud, or on Spectra's Black Pearl or Scality Ring. Pick whichever you want. And that's kind of the point, isn't it? You don't know necessarily which criteria you're going to need to use to make decisions on your storage. By being able to access the subset of files that you need, regardless of which storage platform it's on, regardless of which namespace it's in, that you can apply global policies to, it gives you tremendous power in a way that otherwise would be almost impossible for a storage administrator trying to manage their unstructured data across multiple silos. So the ability then to have this flexibility of merging the metadata with how you take action on these is crucial. And so although, I can get sort of an easy view of how old the data is and so forth within this, the reality is that being able to manage those files across tape libraries, or being able to manage your policies or add policies, being able to do reports across these, gives a storage administrator tremendous amount of power to think differently about how they manage their environment. And because everything that I'm showing you in the UI can also be accessed via an open API, it means that whether it be for monitoring, external system monitoring with Nagios or Splunk or other monitoring tools, or being able to create your own workflows, extending your own applications, means that you don't have to even use the UI. Everything that I do here is driven by the API. In fact, this web application uses those same APIs. And that is by design. It means that you don't have to be limited into one way of doing things, because ultimately, when you merge storage resource management with data management, you need the ability to have a user experience that is just completely isolated from any storage administration, have a storage administrator experience that can take action on data without interrupting users. For example, if I take this query, which is the archive and retention, and let's build a policy with that. Let's say I want to, the retention policy has expired, and I want to, delete these from not all stores necessarily, but I want to make sure that they've deleted from maybe tier 1, maybe even tier 2, if it would happen to be on a scality ring. But I do want to leave a copy on LTFS, which will then go on a shelf. I can use that query, that archive and retention query, to build that job. And because this may be recurring, that retention date is going to, every day or every month, you may want to run this, and it's going to look for new files that have meet those criteria. You can set this up as a scheduled job. Let it run on midnights, or every month or every year or every day. You've got that power. Again, doesn't matter which storage it happens to be on. It doesn't matter, any of that. You can run that query first to ensure that, yep, this is the result I want. You can run a report based on that same query so you can export and say, yep, I want to make sure that I can see that report. I can access that and build that based on that same query. And then I can actually physically run that job based on a scheduled job that I may have done. So in essence, then what you have is a platform that can be not in your way. In other words, we're not altering your file systems. We're not creating any abstraction in the file system itself. Your files are your files, and we're not altering them. We're not requiring you to install a piece of software on all your users' platforms. In fact, you may only restrict this interface to system administrators. Of course, you're coming into the system based on your Active Directory credentials, so you can only see what you're entitled to see and do what you're entitled to do. But you can manage this internally. You can create your own metadata on the fly, whether it be something like the example I always use of creating a project ID or a date or other variables. Being able to create these within a system so that you can make more intelligence, and so that your data sets are not just sitting there taking up space, but you can actually add more information to them over time. So the intelligence about your data can become more and more, can become richer over time, which then gives you more granular control over which data store should it be on. We have customers, for example, that by being able to limit the amount of primary storage, the most expensive type that they buy, because they can intelligently move this whether it be to cloud or to tape or to an object store, being able to transparently manage that data across them means that they save a lot of money on their primary stores. Never do they have to ask, to not have an answer when somebody asks them, well, how active is that data on your primary store? Is it really need to live there? And instead of the answer I often get is, well, we're not entirely sure how active it is or how often it's being used. That all of that makes it much more difficult to justify moving that data off to somewhere else, or even knowing what you can delete. So the goal is keep that primary store at the smallest practical level so that your users are not impacted, you minimize data movement unless it's needed, but also make sure that everything that is on there is dynamically in the right spot. And then have the freedom to pick other storage types, which maybe your preferred storage vendor has an object store, but you may like another one better. Or you want to go to cloud and don't want to be locked into a particular vendor's gateway or a particular vendor's file type, or even something as prosaic as LTFS. Still the cheapest possible solution, the lowest cost media for bulk storage, even if it's only to create a vaulted copy to help protect against ransomware. So at the end of the day, then, what you wind up with is a solution that enables you to look across all of your different storage platforms, to be able to start small, from as small as a single node that can manage, still, even a single node can manage hundreds of millions, even into the billions of files, depending on the metadata size. Or to expand to a complete HA system where with 3 nodes, where there's automatic failover, so that for mission critical applications where you can't have downtime, being able to present this as a global namespace and have users access this through multiple protocols, regardless of whether that underlying storage even supports that protocol. Being able to do multi-site DR replication, moving those files from one place to another, even files that would be typically out of band, where you've got direct access from your most high performant use cases. In addition, as you're making copies, as you're ensuring that you've got enough data protection, being able to reduce the amount that you're spending on classic backup applications, which are great at solving one problem, but don't really help you solve the underlying problem of ensuring that the data is sitting on the right spot. Which is why it's important to remind you that we are not priced by capacity. Manage as much data as you like. You're not going to get a growing bill as your data grows. You buy the number of nodes based on the number of CPU cores that are required for your use case and your performance level, and away you go. Again, we're not altering your file systems. You don't need agents, stubs, or symlinks, because over time, anybody who manages data over any length of time knows that stubs and symlinks can become fragile and break. As you move data from one store to the next, as old stores become end of life and need to be moved, anytime you've got a stub-based workflow, it means you're kind of going through a same hierarchy every time. But you may originate your data here, want it to go directly to tape without leaving stubs or needing to hop through multiple tiers, but then restore it back directly to somewhere else. So without having to rehydrate through the same hierarchy. And it's key with any system that tries to do this, that you're compatible with any storage type and from any vendor. Because even though you may have the preferred vendor now, you don't want to be limited into a one-size-fits-all storage or into a one-vendor-fits-all, which limits your choices and actually over time can become quite expensive. Finally, being able to do this by policy, taking the intelligence that the data itself communicates to you through extracted metadata, through classifying your files, by giving you a tool that enables you to add more information to those files over time, driven by workflows, so that your data set becomes richer and richer with the accumulated metadata over time. All of these things, by being able to reduce your load on primary, by being able to move data to different stores, can reduce your storage costs, and particularly if you're using tape, by as much as 80%, but also operational costs. It's kind of a maximum in the industry that your operational costs for storage are 5 times the acquisition costs. And that's directly a result of the manual work that IT administrators, whether it be for any of the use cases that we mentioned before, that an IT administrator someone is going to have to be doing these tasks. And that someone is going to be your IT administrator. And that is really going to be, is what will keep your system from really being the most efficient that it can be. So with that, let me stop and open the floor to questions and hand it back over to you, Nick.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Floyd. So yeah, we'll take some more questions at the moment. So I think we've got a couple of questions come into the question. Just a reminder, at the bottom of your screen there is a questions box. Please do put them in there, and we'll do our best to answer them. But I just want to pick up on a couple of points that you raised. You know, obviously we're talking a lot about data security and how that's managed, and removing user error from workflows. But if someone did accidentally delete something, how does StrongLink deal with that?
Well, there's several ways. One is the system itself is we will version those files, right? So underneath the surface, and this is a versioning you can prune, so you don't have to keep all versions, but as files change, we will create a version within the system. So that you can roll back to a previous version if there's a problem. In addition to that, a delete in our system automatically is a soft delete. So you may remember when I was clicking and when I had a result set, one of the policies was a hard delete. By policy, you can determine whether or not you want the hard delete, but by default, it is always a soft delete. And thirdly is that we can manage multiple copies of these files at the same time. So your primary copy might be sitting on that isilon, but you may already have a secondary copy sitting on an object store or in Amazon or on tape. So that, and this particularly gets important depending on the class of data that you have and whether there's issues like ransomware protection or other things. So what we realize is there's a responsibility for our software, as there is for database or data administrators, data center administrators, is you have to be stewards of your data. So we create these multiple levels of protection so that you can be assured that that data is always going to be available, that it's protected in multiple ways, and you can really manage best practices of protecting the data without having to worry about the mechanics of which storage, this data should be versus another class of data.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And one of the questions that came in actually is you were talking about the sort of web UI and administrators and users. I know you have some, you have some examples of customers which are, secure, highly secure security services or the like. But if you could just tell the listeners something a little bit more about, how have you got defined administrators and users, or how that differentiation works, and how you might, how I guess you integrate with Active Directory.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, all user roles, we have what we call security descriptors, and all user roles, whether it be administrator or general user or other things, will map to their Active Directory group ID or user ID. We also support LDAP, and we are releasing SAML for two-factor authentication later on this year. So what that means is that depending on who I am, my administrator, storage administrator, doesn't need to manage a whole different set of permissions or criteria that my user ID maps to my user role within the system. In addition, we're going to be respecting the permissions and Windows ACLs that will come at us from the files themselves. So again, StrongLink meant to be a layer on top without necessarily, and using the same tools that you already have for user authentication, for user roles, to determine what they're allowed to do within the system.
Perfect. And I guess that leads on to something else. Is the non-proprietary nature of the system? Obviously you've talked a lot about not using symlinks or stubs. You're not using agents or anything. So what does that mean, for a user that wants to be assured that they can always sort of get access to their data? Obviously, you've said in previous webinars that data obviously outlives by quite a long time the hardware, but hopefully it won't outlive your software. But
well, it may do. Companies change, and if I'm storing data, I mean, depending on your industry, my mandate may be to store that for not just 7 years, but maybe 50 years or 100 years, as in media and entertainment. So there's no guarantee that any company is going to be here 30 years from now. So, which is why we don't alter the file systems, right? We do have a containering, solution for managing small files, but even then, by putting it in these virtual containers, we also provide an open source tool to be able to unpack. But probably most importantly is the metadata, right? Because we're not trapping that metadata in any proprietary format either. Through the API or through a metadata export, these are all standard JSON documents. You can be piped into asset management systems or database exchange with asset management systems when the time comes, so that that you can access the files with or without StrongLink. You can access the metadata with or without StrongLink. And then if we're doing our job, we'll earn our keep there by helping make it easier for you to manage this data without feeling like you're trapped. I talk often about vendor lock, right? Yeah. And it would not be very, very good of me to, rail against vendor lock on storage vendors and then provide a different sort of vendor lock with a software solution meant to overcome that. And we do not.
Brilliant. And there's a question just come in. It's reading about the API. I think it's probably more from a media vertical. They're asking about transcoders and would there be integration with transcoders, or how might that happen?
Sure.
Could some metadata be used to trigger a transcode or like workflow?
Sure, because the API is open and you can do anything. In fact, you can do more through the API than you can through the UI itself. There's no limitation to an external application accessing the system, and the documentation is very, very complete. Being able to run a query, get a result set, for example, on a set of data that needs to be transcoded, initiate the transcode, and then save that data back into a designated namespace upon which then policies would be applied to the new data. Now it's landed, make a copy, annotate it, or whatever. So being able to extend the system, and it is extensible through the API, whether you want to put rich text indexers or transcoders or other sort of AI or ML sort of things. That's the beauty of having an aggregated metadata across any of the storage. So now you've got this common denominator to be able to come in from either a user experience through the UI or through the file system, or applications or other things that may come in that way.
Perfect. So I think that's probably, don't want to, we're sort of at 40 minutes, so keen not to, I know everyone's time is precious and they're being bombarded for webinars. So, but I do just, I know I've banged on about it. You can tell I'm a salesperson at heart, about your pricing model, because this is one of the really key things about the platform is that there's no, you know, as you guys term it, it's termed a capacity tax. So do you want to just, in a nutshell, just quickly run over the kind of pricing model, because I think that's key to the whole.
Sure.
The key to the drivers for people looking at the software, I think.
Sure. As I've explained, and is that we don't think it's right for a data management solution to charge based on the amount of data you have. You know, we've adopted a performance model. Not everybody's going to have the same I/O or the same throughput that they may need, and so it's unfair to make that a one-size-fits-all. So you buy what you need. If you're a small system, 200, 300 terabytes, you may get away with a single node. You know, if you want HA, okay, you add 2 more and you get a 3 nodes. But if you're a large system that needs to be in the hundreds of petabytes and moving what could be, you know, petabytes a week or a month, you need a lot more bandwidth. And so by charging by the performance, it means that you have a fixed price for everything, from all software maintenance, upgrades, and everything based on the performance level that you know you can confidently budget. And 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, depending on what you buy, you know that price isn't going to change and you're going to be getting upgrades. Yeah. The only variable would be in tape. Tape is an optional upgrade, but here again, we're not charging based on the capacity, we're charging based on performance. So you license a certain number of drives, you pay a fixed fee for that, and now you've now enabled the system at the bandwidth you need for the amount of I/O you need to tape, and you're good to go.
So you could have, you know, if you're talking about moving, you know, tens of terabytes a day or something in that instance, you know, single node, a couple or few tape drives on it, and you would know your costs over 5 years, really, you know, and you could put, you know, 200 terabytes in it, or you could put 100 petabytes in it. The cost.
That's right. We're not storing any customer data. We only store the metadata. So you don't need to buy a cache from us. You don't need to buy anything from us except the software. Install it on your own hardware or on a VM. The demo system I was running on a VM. Install it on your own in your own environment. Let it help you as a tool set to help you manage your environment, but do that in a way that your costs are fixed.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks very much. Let's just quickly skip through just to say thank you very much. Obviously, show you our contact details. As I said, my name's Nick. I'm with Global. I'm a director here. You can reach me at nickw@globaldistribution.com. And Floyd is CEO of Strongbox Data Solution, and he's very easy. It's just fc@strongboxdata.com. This series of Bright Talk virtual events, there's been 3 of them. This was the 3rd one. The first one was on addressing data disorder, and then we moved to protect and manage. And obviously, Floyd's been talking today about workflow magic. So all these now are available on Bright Talk for you to go and review at your leisure. But of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact either myself or Floyd directly, or go to globaldistribution.com or strongboxdata.com to find out more information about either of our companies. So let's just end that slide and pop back. Oh, sorry, caught you unaware. Caught you unawares. And just to say thank you very much, Floyd. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope everyone else has found it as informative as I have. You've got some new features hopefully coming out towards the end of the year. So hopefully another series of 1 or 2 or maybe 3 webinars coming down the line, Strongbox and Floyd. So thanks very much for your time. Hope everybody enjoyed it, and we'll catch you all soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen.
Perfect. Cheers. Thanks. Bye.